Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here this evening for the Middlebury New Filmmakers Festival presentation of Doubt, written and directed by John Patrick Shanley. My name is Dawn Wagner. I'm the owner of Daily Chocolate in Vergennes, and Daily Chocolate is proud to be a sponsor, small but sweet part of the festival this year as a food sponsor again, so thank you for that privilege. Now I have to admit it's not in my wheelhouse to be doing a Q&A with a world-renowned playwright and a screenwriter and director, but brief story. Back in 2000, so a few decades ago now, I had just moved to New York City to pursue my stage management career, and I was 23. It was December, and I had been there a few months, and I found myself at the New Year's Eve party for Labyrinth Theater Company, and that was a really big deal for me. Labyrinth was like the it company at that time, and in fact, they had just closed Jesus Hopped the A Train that evening. And so I was really excited to see who I would see. John Ortiz and Ron Cephas Jones were in that show, and of course it was directed by Philip Seymour Hoffman, so I was very eager and excited to be there that night. My friend pulled me aside and said, "Hey, see that guy over there?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "That's John Patrick Shanley." And I said, "Wow, John Patrick, who are we talking, who? Who are we talking about here?" So long story short, that was about 2.5 decades ago. I've had the pleasure of working with John on probably, I don't know, a dozen projects or so. We have literally spent hours in a rehearsal room together, and I can tell you it's magic. It's like a master class being there, so thank you for that. So without further ado, the man who got me my equity card, my good friend, playwright, screenwriter, director, and poet, John Patrick Shanley.
It's nice to be here. It's very nice to be here with Dawn and her family is here tonight, so that's an especially. And I've eaten a lot of her chocolate.
That is true.
Full disclosure. We were saying in the audience, Dawn said, "When's the last time you saw this film?" And I said, "I think shortly after it came out. I have not seen it in the intervening years." When it started, I started to realize that. I'm like, I didn't even remember doing that scene. I don't remember writing that scene. It's a peculiar thing, this particular one. I've done a lot of plays and a decent number of movies. And I remember I wrote this play, and I did a first reading of it with a very small group of people, including my agent. And when the reading was over, my agent came over to me, and there was a kind of subdued feeling in the room. And he came over to me and he said, "Congratulations." And I said, "Is it good?" I said, "I can't really tell. I was tense through the whole thing, and I'm still tense." And when I watch it now, it still does that. I feel on the hook, right till the end and beyond the end.
So let's talk about that evolution a little. Doubt is 20 years old this summer. I believe your first public reading of the play was at New York Stage and Film up at Vassar College-ish. And I would say it was a rather fast progression. Of course, you have a history with Manhattan Theater Club and all that, which perhaps makes it a little bit easier because they trust you and your work and what you're going to bring. But that reading was in the summertime. I believe by November, the show was mounted off-Broadway at City Center, Manhattan Theater Club, and then by that following March-ish of 2005, you were open on Broadway at the Walter Kerr. And then jumping ahead 3 years later, you were already 2008 or 8, I believe,
Yeah.
this film came out. So can you talk a little bit about that progression? Obviously, it's an adapted from the stage to the screen, and what's that like?
Well, in the opening credits, you see that it's a Scott Rudin production, and Scott Rudin, who at a certain point a few years ago got some bad press for like throwing baked potatoes at assistants. He's you know, if you know somebody by the colorful anecdote, you don't really necessarily know them. He's the greatest theatrical producer of our time, who has not worked in theater since there was this sort of round of negative press that drove him out over really not very much. He produced the play with some other people, but then he called me into his office and he said, I think this should be a movie. And I said, yeah, me too. And he said, you want to direct it? And I said, yeah. And he said, great. And that was the deal, you know? It was as simple as
so
that.
Easy.
At least that
so
part.
Simple.
Huh?
Was this your first full adaptation from stage to screen?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I had done Joe versus the Volcano, which I had directed, and I drove Warner Brothers right out of their mind the whole time that I was doing it, because I kept doing things that didn't look like commercial filmmaking. And as a result, I did not work again as a director for 17 years until Rudin said, well, I think you should direct it. And I'm like, yeah, you know. It was an interrupted conversation of 17 years. And then I adapted another play after that, and I've now adapted yet another play, which I'm probably going to be directing in about a month or two, a couple of months. And it's a peculiar thing. You take a play, and the play's got 4 characters, and now you're going to make it into a feature film. And the feature film's going to cost $20 million, and they want to get their money back. And how do you do that? There's no car chases, there's no guns, everybody's dressed in black down to their ankles, and it's scary. But it's also, you have to rely very much on the actual power of the story, and just say, well, I think this is a story worth telling, and we'll find out whether or not people agree with us. And it went very well.
Now, is that filmmaker lens something you have on when you are writing a play?
No, I write a play to write a play, and because there's something that I want to, there's something that I need to hit the air, that I need to share with my community or my jury. I don't write about things that I know the answer to. I write about things that I need to find out the answer to on one level or another. I'm working on something now that is a fascinating process that I'm going through. I wrote this original screenplay, and I got to a certain place. First, I wrote it, and I wrote the first act, and I wrote the second act, and they were both good. But I intentionally wrote it, and I did not know what the third act was. And when I got to the third act, I could not do it. And I made it that way. I made it so that the audience would go like, well, what could possibly happen now? And I didn't know. But I knew that if I got to a place where I did know, that I might really have something. And so after I kept running into the stone wall, not being able to write the third act for a long time, I finally forced myself to write a third act, and then I called up Bob Zemeckis, and who I hadn't spoken to in, I don't know, 7 years. And I said, I wrote something, you want to read it? And he said, yeah, anything you write, I like to read. So I sent him this thing, and just a very few days goes by, and he calls me, because I read it. I said, that first act is terrific, the second act is really good, and then you killed everybody. I said, yeah, I didn't know how to finish it, so I just killed everybody. But I needed to talk to somebody about it, so I wanted to do something, so I just did something, you know. And that we started up a conversation, and then you know, we talked for a while, and then I went off and I rewrote it, and I sent it to him, and he read it, and he called me, and he goes, you know, I'm still having like all kinds of problems with this third act. I said, so am I. I'm here to talk. I'm working on this thing. I'm trying to, well, we have now done this like 5 times, and the last time was this morning. I got here and the phone rang and it was him, and he was like ready to go. And we're talking about this thing, but we're also talking about how to basically come up with a philosophy that consoles us about the fact that we're going to die. And that how that's kind of good. And that I feel good about that. Because you know, we all were subjected to the standard happy ending of stories, that things end well, that things that do end well, end well. But in fact, no, none of these stories really end well. They just stop them in the middle, in a good part, and say that's the end. And I said, I want to do it all the way, and I want to find a way to feel good about it. But it can't be candy-ass, and it can't be a lie, and I'm trying to figure that out. And so we're going back and forth about the meaning of life now. I don't know if this movie's ever going to be seen by anyone. But apropos of God knows what, back to you.
So a question about, I mean, you're just saying you write about what you don't know and what you want to figure out. That being said, there's definitely little snippets of autobiographical, you know, stuff that flies through these movies. You are from an Irish-American family, grew up in the Bronx in a Italian neighborhood.
Italian and Irish.
An Irish neighborhood. Yeah. Went to Catholic school.
I went to the schools that you see on screen. The movie starts on the block that I grew up on. My son Francis is a kid riding a bicycle in the opening sequence of the thing. My sister Patsy and my brother-in-law Eddie are featured in the congregation, as were the superintendent and her 3 children of where I lived in Brooklyn at the time that I was doing this. So, you know, you're so into this, all of the quilting of your own life, and because it helps. It helps to make it have richness and meaning. And the more specificity anything you do has, the better it is.
And Sister James?
Pardon me?
Sister James?
I can't hear you.
Sister James.
Oh, well, yeah, well.
This is a good one.
You know, I wrote the play, and we did it, and we got into previews of Manhattan Theater Club, hadn't opened yet. We started performances, and this woman came one night who knew some people from my own neighborhood, and she said, I told Sister James that you wrote a play about her, and she's very excited. She's coming tonight. And I was like, I thought she was dead. The only reason I didn't change the name, I was certain she was dead. And son of a gun, she showed up with the other nun that taught the other half of first grade. She was my first grade school teacher when I was 6. And what I didn't completely understand at the time that I was 6 was that I was in her first class. She was like 21. And in fact, we just did the revival of Down on Broadway this past season, and Sister James is still alive and came to opening night again. And at the end, you may or may not have noticed, but the film is dedicated to Sister James, aka Peggy McKenty, and who I hired as technical advisor on the film. And I negotiated her salary with Scott Rudin, which was donated to charity because she has a vow of poverty. She was telling Meryl Streep how to tie her rosary and all of that stuff. Very comfortable doing that.
Fabulous, thank you for that story. So let's talk about this stellar cast. You are no stranger to amazing big name people. Tomorrow we're showing Moonstruck at 2:00, so Cher and Nick Cage. I believe you are the first to pair Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan.
Yep.
John found the chemistry there.
Yeah. Actually, I just heard from Meg Ryan a week ago. She wanted to see if she could direct something that I had written. So they're all out there flitting about.
Right.
I've done some project stuff behind the scenes with Tom Hanks, and it's I've been gratified. I've gotten to work with very good people for a long time, and in this is kind of the Gold Coast of acting. And all four of those actors were nominated for Academy Awards for this, and deservedly so. Amy Adams was the newest, and Viola was not unknown, but close to unknown. This was a major, it kind of launched Viola. Not that she wouldn't have been launched with whatever the hell the next thing, because she was just such an extraordinary talent. And Amy Adams read the script and flew to New York on her own dime to meet with me because she wanted the part so much. Meryl just came on board, but Phil was I was friendly with, I hung out with, and I called him up and said, you want to do this part? And he said, oh, John, I'm so busy, but send it over. And I sent it, and he called the next day and said, I'll do it. And Phil was tough. He was an uncompromising artist, and it was a great thing that he did it, and a sad thing that he's gone. Yeah.
Before we turn it over to the audience, just to speak, I'm going to ask the question that you may have that I know John does not answer about this film, which is perhaps you and maybe one or two other people know the certainty in this situation, which is, did Father Flynn do it or not? Is he guilty of the things he's been accused of? Obviously, you have your version of this. I believe you have shared your thoughts on this with Brina Faubern, who portrayed Father Flynn on Broadway, and I don't know if you shared it with Phil or not.
Mm-hmm. Well, Brian, who's from Ireland and has since returned to Ireland, has the devil in him. And so, he originated the role of the priest. He touted about backstage that I had told him the secret of the whatever, and that on closing night he would reveal. And a reporter came to me with this, and I said, "That's all well and good, and that's true what he said, but I lied to Brian." And on a more truthful level, the truth is, you can't know the truth of another person. you can't know the truth. You don't know your own truth. It's the most challenging thing I think a person can do in their lives, is to try to understand themselves. And we lie to ourselves. We lie to ourselves incessantly. And for us to face, just to be able to embrace the facts of our life is almost impossible for anyone I've ever known to truly and completely do. Though many people think they do. And there was a long period of my life when I thought I did. And then I started to take these showers. You know, I'd get up in the morning, take a shower, and I always liked taking a shower, and then one day in the shower, I started to remember something I'd done many years before, and I went, oh, I'd forgotten that was, and from that time, and every day in the shower, I'd remember another unfortunate thing that I had done, until now I'm afraid to go in the shower. And so when as you start to realize how much you've buried, obscured, hidden, and distorted about your own biography, how can you possibly know what the next person is doing? Or what the truth of what they did or why they did it? They don't know why they did it, whatever the hell they did or didn't do. Nobody knows what's going on. We are delusional creatures. And we live metaphorical lives more than real lives. Everything we do stands for something else. Every single thing, every action, every flicker that goes across our face is representative of something else that we are not in charge of. How many times have I thought, when I walk down the street and a person walks by me and glances at me and goes on and never sees me again, that they see something in that 1 second about me that I will never know. And that's one of the many, many truths of life that we have to live with. So to say something like, did the priest do this or something, the point, the really delectable point in this is that we are mysteries. And we, revel in a minor way, and when we are presented with some kind of mystery, like mystery book or movie or TV show or something, and then at the end you find out, and it feels satisfying. But the truth is, on a spiritual level, we are mysterious to ourselves, and we will never get to the bottom of it. And so the thing that you have to do is you have to start to enjoy that truth, rather than run away from it.
Thank you. So we have a microphone here for our audience. If you have questions, raise your hand. We've got a runner here with the microphone. Why don't we go straight back?
It's like Phil Donahue's come back from the dead.
Just a quick follow-up question to Dawn. Was Tony Soprano killed in the end or not? The one thing I really did want to ask, it's so brilliant to see your show, is when you're directing those actors, say the scene in the principal's office that was so extraordinary with the tea, how much of that are you really guiding, and how much of that are you just stepping back and letting their kind of brilliance go?
Well, when you got really well prepared, brilliant actors, the first thing you do is let them do what they do. And then if you run into a problem, then you gotta step in. And there's always, if you're dealing with really good people, this is, it makes you queasy. And we had that in the big scene in The Office, where we had rehearsed in just a rehearsal room before we ever shot this stuff. And we'd rehearsed the big confrontation between the priest and Sister Aloysius in The Office. And we had staged it. And when we staged it, Phil was behind the desk, and they fought over the desk. And then we got to the day, and we rehearsed it on the set, good. And then the cameraman, who was the brilliant Roger Deakins, is lighting it for like an hour, which is not a long time to be lighting a scene like that. And then I said, Phil, it doesn't work. We're gonna have to change it. He's like, what? You're gonna have to come out from behind the desk. He said, but we rehearsed it behind the desk. I said, I know. And I literally did. I just hung my head. I waited a while, and I said, you're gonna have to come out from behind the desk. And then the cameramen are always eavesdropping. He's like, okay, totally different fucking idea. Forgive my language. It wasn't me, it was the cameraman. And so Phil came out from behind the desk like a snowplow. He came out with this raging energy, which was partially, I can't believe I have to come out from behind the desk. But it really worked for the scene, so that, that kind of alteration and interference with what the actor's doing is something, it's a big thing to do. And I don't do it lightly. Meryl's last line, where she goes to the door and she says, and cut your nails. She did it, and it was good. She did it again. And I said, can you give me a big one? Like when you really blow it out? And she's like, she does it again, no louder, We did it like 3 more times. And I'm like, and Vaughn goes, and cut your nail! And and I knew that she knew that I was never going to use that tape. So she could have it both ways. And I wouldn't be surprised. It's been almost 20 years since we made that film, or 17 or something, that I wouldn't be surprised that if she still hasn't forgiven me.
Another question. Over here.
So we saw the show on Broadway shortly after it opened, and then when the movie came out immediately we saw it, and we certainly thought that the ending was perfect. And tonight, the same thing. It was perfect. But as the film ended, I was saying, what possibly would take that certainty in Sister Aloysius and somehow break it to where she had doubts? And I'm not sure I've thought that through yet. Maybe that's what our job is as an audience, figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, haven't you felt, watching the news for the last several years, like just wanting to burst into tears and go, I don't know, man, it's overwhelming. Life is overwhelming sometimes. And what, Sister Aloysius is having doubts about, that's left to you, what you think she's having doubts about. Whatever it is, I think it's big. And we go along, I remember that time in my life. I was a kid, and the world seemed to be a thing that was eternal. These nuns would always be teaching in the school, and we would always go into the church on Sunday, and people would live in those houses the way they always had, and dress the same way, and have the same jobs. And guess what? Like in 4 years, it was all swept away. It's all gone. Everything that's up there was gone. Those people started moving away. The nuns stopped wearing those outfits. The church went into one of its many crises. The demographics of the neighborhood changed completely. The Vietnam War kicked in and took so many of the young men away. But we did, you don't see it. You don't see it coming. The '60s were coming. The assassinations, the rock stars' deaths, the news that no longer seemed to make sense, that you had a worldview that crumbled and had to be replaced. And I think that we're going through that in a big way now, where people are like, I just don't get it. I don't see, I had a worldview and a philosophy that was working for me, and I knew what I believed and what I wanted to do, what I didn't want to do, what I agreed with, what I didn't. And now you go like, I'm not sure what the heck I believe. I'm not sure what I think I should do or anybody else should do. Some people do think that they know what other people should do. And those people have always been there. They have very often seemed to be the strong people because they have certainty. And the people who have doubts and are just not sure, they seem like the weak people. And get out of my way, because I know. But the incredible depth of doubt, what it gives a person is wisdom. And it can prevent you from doing some rash and terrible things. And it can make you kinder. And it can make you more compassionate to other points of view than your own, more tolerant. So I feel for Sister Aloysius. And it's true that penmanship has died.
Bring back the fountain pen.
Yeah. Right up the aisle there.
I'm wondering where you came up with the story about the feathers, and then if you had any story behind the shooting of that scene. I'm just curious about the feathers.
I'm sorry.
The feathers, the sermon about the pillow on the rooftop.
The provenance of that sermon is. It was first recorded usage was by the Cure of Ars in the Middle Ages, and it also was in a rabbinical tradition from the late Middle Ages, and it is, when I was a kid, a priest in our parish gave that sermon and attributed it to nobody. I assumed he made it up on the spot. And one of the things that you kind of don't realize is that all those ministers just do nothing but steal constantly from each other. It's a worthy story, and it's funny. I felt a little at 6s and 7s when I first wrote it. I thought, people. And by the way, when I wrote it because I'd heard this priest give this sermon. I didn't know it went back further than that. And then I researched it after I wrote the play and realized that it went back to the Middle Ages at least. And thought, oh, well, that's a different matter. I didn't steal it from that one priest. I'm one of a long chain of thieves. That was, we actually just got big bags of feathers and went up on those roofs, and we had blowers, that's the alleyways that I used to run in when I was a kid, and had the feathers coming down, all those, and we went back, we shot a lot of stuff there after that. Those feathers were in that neighborhood for months.
Yes, right here.
I was curious, in the scene where Sister Aloysius is talking to the mother, and then after that scene she walks back in a severe rainstorm with crackling thunder and with the leaves blowing past her. And I just wondered, was that supposed to also represent the pillow on the roof and the finger of God pointing down at her for doubt?
Yeah, no, I don't know. Well, but I mean, there's another like lower than God thing. I don't want to go all the way to God there. There's the wind, and they talk about the wind throughout the film. She's constantly having to close the windows in her office because this wind is coming in and leaves are blowing in, and she doesn't know who's opening these windows. And she's also talking about the wind is different now, and that it's changed. And so I guess I would sort of put at the end, Flynn's final sermon, he says there's a wind behind us that moves us through life, and we have no control over it, can't even see it. And so my lame-ass answer is that I guess sort of like the winds of change, the zeitgeist behind it. But it's funny, when I first putting the film together, Scott said, "Who do you see for Sister Aloysius?" And I said, "Meryl Streep." And he said, "Me too." He said, you should have lunch with her." And I'm like, "Okay." And
it's that easy, huh?
I said, "Should we send her the script?" He said, "You should have lunch with her first, then we'll send her the script." I'm like, "Okay." So we go, we have lunch. She's very nice. And finally, very gently, the subject turned to the movie. "Oh, and yes, and then this movie, And she said, and then she talked a little bit about the difference between plays and films, and how you could do things in films that you can't do in plays, and maybe I would do some things like that, because she's talking to a playwright who she's praying to God is not going to, make a dead-on-arrival movie. And I said, "Well, I'm thinking that in this, that the wind is going to be a character." And she said, "The wind? Oh, I love the wind." And I thought, oh, she's going to do it. I just had to toss her a bone. Whatever it was, she was going to do it.
I think we have time for another question in the back.
You've almost answered my question. I was really wondering, when you go from a play to a screenplay, do you see that as a second bite at the apple to be creative and to try and play with things and move them in a slightly new and different direction, or are you just trying to be faithful to your original vision?
No, you can't just be faithful to the original. It's the first version has 4 people in it, and they talk a lot more than they do in the movie, and there's nobody else. There's no kids. There's no parishioners. And so when I first sat down to write the screenplay, it was the most difficult job I'd ever taken on. And I wrote, it was a bad situation. I was in an apartment that was being renovated and around me. And so power tools were going all day long, and I'm sitting at a desk, and every day at 3 o'clock I cried because I knew it was no good. And I got to page 50, and I wrote the scene about the feathers. And I said, oh, well, that works. That'll work. And that gave me the strength, or the courage, whatever word you want to use, to go back to page 1 and say, I'm going to have to solve this 3 times a page. There's no big overarching solution to how I turn this from a play into a film. I'm going to have to figure this out 3 times a page. I'm going to have to motivate a camera move 3 times a page, otherwise it's going to be too static. And I've got to investigate every tiny thing in this world and make it something that actually pertains to the story and is good within itself. So, you know, whether it's the kid having the wire coming out of his ear, or the light bulb that blows out over Sister Aloysius's desk, or when the intercom goes off, or when the phone starts ringing and nobody will answer it, all of those are events that I figured out to put where they needed to be in order to keep it 3-dimensional. And it's a you know, fascinating puzzle, you know, in the scene with the priests smoking cigarettes and drinking whiskey and eating bloody red meat, and then you go to the nuns in utter silence. You know, that is probably my most successful film-like moment in the thing, because you get it without any dialogue at all. That's what you're constantly looking for that. So the nuns getting up in the morning in the hallway, walking around in their nightgowns and stuff, that's visual stuff that adds to the movie. I was struck, you know, because I hadn't seen it in a very long time, about the silences in the opening of the film. I thought, that's really nice, that really helps. Rather than, you know, it's a play and it starts and suddenly everybody starts talking like mad, like crazy people. You know?
Well, I think we're going to wrap up here. So thank you, John, for coming to Middlebury.